So, your idea for a YouTube video
Yes, it's my idea for a YouTube video of Costco, right?
for the church or just
I don't know for the church. I mean, another actually. There's two video ideas I've had that relate to Costco and YouTube videos.
Okay.
One, the title would be and thumbnail. How long you could, like, if you buy one of the Kirkland T-shirts that say like Costco on it, you know?
Oh yeah.
How long you could work in the parking lot and return carts before someone asks you what you're doing? Like if you just put a Kirkland T-shirt on, and if you just start going through the parking lot and taking all the carts and pushing them back, how long could you do that before someone's like, "Hey, like, what are you doing here? This is my job." Like you're just doing it for free. I feel like it depends. Someone might just let you do it all day long, and they're like, "Oh, okay, I'm getting paid for this, so you can just keep going."
That's some like Huckleberry Finn stuff right there.
Or like, would they actually stop you?
Yeah.
Like if you're taking all their carts back, would a manager come out and be like, "Hey, you're not allowed to do this"?
Yeah, I wonder if it could be like an insurance thing.
Probably.
Of like hey, if you ding someone's car,
yeah.
like it's gonna be an issue.
I just think it'd be really funny though, like for a manager to come out and be like, "Hey, you need to stop working for free.
Yeah.
You need to stop volunteering."
Go volunteer.
But I feel like that'd be
somewhere
funny.
else.
Or if you're like you're impersonating like a Costco person, I guess, if you're wearing their T-shirt.
Yeah.
But Costco employees, like they just wear normal clothes with like a name tag.
With a badge.
Yeah, with a badge.
Yeah.
Like honor the badge, you know? You gotta- So the second YouTube video idea was how long you could survive eating Costco samples. Only Costco samples.
Yeah.
And if the Vitamix guy's there, you got a pretty good shot. I think you could last a long
maybe
time.
if you worked at like the PT Northwest that's there, or in the Salem clinic that's in the parking lot, you just walk over there on your lunch break and just scrounge around the samples and grab a smoothie at the end.
So in that shopping center, I was reading Google Maps reviews, which I do because they're mostly hilarious and entertaining. But I was looking at the Starbucks because there's a new Starbucks on the corner where there's gonna be a Crumble, a Killer Burger, Chick-fil-A all in there.
Yeah.
And they had a 1-star review, and it was from a guy who had physical therapy at the Salem clinic, or like the PT
Northwest.
PT Northwest, yeah. And he goes, "The parking lot's always been full since the Starbucks was here. This is the worst ever. They don't care about their neighbors, whatever." And 1 star. And I was like, you gave Starbucks a 1 star because you feel like they take up parking for PT Northwest? I just felt like it's a little penny.
If you want to talk about bad parking, I mean, this is only relevant to people who live in Salem, but if you want to talk about bad parking,
The old Costco? That was terrible.
that was pretty bad. But French press,
Oh, dude, who designed that parking lot?
that is the worst.
Those spots are the tiniest spots I've ever experienced in my life.
Well, you know what's funnier is that every single time I go there, there's a minimum of 3 like F-350 or like Chevy
lifted
3500s. I'm like, did you just drive over the foliage to get here?
Yeah.
Like you don't. My Subaru barely fits in here.
I seriously don't understand who designed that parking lot because it is always insanely packed, which is good for business.
Yeah.
But those spots are so tiny. And there's only like one edge that has regular size spots.
Yeah.
That's always taken up by small cars.
It's ridiculous. Every single space, except for those like 3 or 4, every single space in that parking lot has a little C for compact.
Yeah, except for that one tiny row on the side.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
I don't know who got the approval for that.
Anyway, Brooke's gonna let every time we drive into that parking lot, she knows I have to say something.
Yeah. It's like, don't talk to Bryce about parking lots. He goes on a...
It's like watching Lord of the Rings and that scene where
he kicks the helmet?
Yeah, he kicks the helmet.
Did you know?
Did you know
that he broke his foot?
So funny.
Side note, I was listening to a video on that, and they were talking about, it was a YouTube video actually, and they were trying to figure out how much footage of Lord of the Rings actually existed.
Oh yeah.
Did you see that?
I saw that.
It was like, I think they have like 12,000 miles, 1,200 miles probably.
Oh, I could see that.
Because it's like, I'm not good with the film stuff, but they shot it on.
Shot at 35 mil.
Yeah. So it's like 12 miles of footage or something like that.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I think it'd probably be 1,200 because
1,200 miles?
1,200 miles. Yeah. So
it was a lot, but I was like, holy smokes. And they calculated that it was like thousands upon thousands of hours of unused footage.
Oh, I believe it.
And I guess like, I forget, what's the studio? Was it Warner Brothers? Fox? I don't remember.
That's New Line Cinema.
New Line? But they have like all the footage hidden in some like warehouse in some mountain somewhere. It's just sitting there.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Because the film reel, if you went and saw Oppenheimer in 70 millimeter IMAX, that film reel just for the final cut was like, I can't remember if it was 11 or 14 miles long.
That's crazy.
Just like the final cut.
Yeah.
Which is just wild.
Yeah. So it's just, they were just like, man, you could watch. I think they said if you edit all the footage together, it'd be like thousands of hours of Lord of the Rings. But that's including like all bloopers, you know, and all the takes, because they do like, you know, 5 or 6 takes of each shot, you know.
Yeah, I'd watch it. 100%.
I know, that's what a guy was top comment was like, I'd watch 1,000 hours of Lord of the Rings.
You probably already have.
Do you think that as a film guy, in my opinion, I think Lord of the Rings has aged, it was at the perfect time, but the special effects have aged better than almost any movie that I've seen from the early 2000s.
And I think a lot of it has to do with they didn't use a lot of special effects.
Yeah. Well, even like the CG from like the troll dudes and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Even they built, so the Golden City of, I always pronounce it wrong, of the
Rohan?
Of Rohan, the capital city of Rohan. So they built that main building. Took them a year to build it.
Like the miniature?
No, it's not a miniature. It's a full size.
It's the real thing?
So it took them over a year to build it, and they only shot there for like 8 days.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But then a bunch of it is real, and then they CG'd it. And I saw like an overlay of what was real and what was fake. And you're right. It's so unbelievably good. And like the miniatures are good. Like just the attention to detail was top notch.
I think it's one of the best trilogies of all time.
Oh, I think hands down.
Yeah.
And it aged so well. It's
so good.
Continues to
and
age
the music every time. I will say when my wife and I watch it, they probably do this on purpose, but Frodo's attitude sometimes it's just like he seems like kind of a pansy sometimes, and I'm probably gonna get roasted by like LOTR fans.
Yeah.
But he's like, oh no, you know, Sam, help me, Sam, you know.
Yeah.
But I guess it's like you don't understand the weight of carrying the ring, and I get that.
Totally.
But just been watching the movie sometimes. My wife and I are like, Frodo.
I love Lord of the Rings.
Get it together, man.
You know what? Brooke and I, we've never not watched the extended.
I don't think I've ever seen no, I've seen it one time.
Yeah, we always watch the extended.
But my wife did give me the Blu-ray. Oh. And I did watch The Hobbit, the 3 of them.
You just
they should just made it one movie, in my personal opinion.
Okay,
or maybe 2.
Before we start getting into the theology, this isn't a Lord of the Rings podcast, but
okay.
but this is really interesting stuff. So the Hobbit trilogy was originally, it wasn't supposed to be Peter Jackson. It was supposed to be Guillermo del Toro.
Okay.
And it was good. He did like the new Pinocchio. He does like a lot of like
the new Pinocchio with Tom Hanks.
No, the new Pinocchio, the stop motion.
Oh, I've never seen that one.
Yeah, it's Guillermo del Toro does a lot of really. I think
like artsy type stuff.
Yeah, maybe he did. Oh man, film people are gonna roast this for this. He didn't do Pan's Labyrinth. I don't remember what he's done now.
Yeah.
Now that I've brought him up, but he's more in that like because The Hobbit was originally more of like a children's novel.
Yeah, it's like one book.
Yeah, and so he's more like that's way more his wheelhouse. So they were gonna have Guillermo del Toro do it, and it was gonna be 2, which I think is good. It's a pretty hefty book.
The middle one in the current series was the one that drags.
Yeah, so they were gonna split it into 2. It's going to be Guillermo del Toro, and then it ended up being a whole thing that Peter Jackson came back into, and it was going to be Peter Jackson and Guillermo del Toro, and then Guillermo was like, I'm out.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he's left him high and dry, huh?
It was just a bunch of weird stuff because the production company wanted 3 movies, so they pushed to 3. It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, all those money grabs, like even Harry Potter, the last one, 2 movies, and it's like. It's just cash grab at that point. Even like the Mission Impossible, right? I didn't see it. Did you see Mission Impossible?
I don't like Tom Cruise.
You're not a Tom Cruise fan. But that one, these days, it's like, part 1 and part 2. I think it's mostly a cash grab.
Yeah.
But anyways.
Before this rabbit trail, you were going to say your second idea for YouTube video involving Costco.
Yeah.
I know it sounds like we're still on a rabbit trail, but I promise we're getting somewhere.
Yes.
Was to just go to Costco and see how long you could survive off of samples.
Yes.
Which that led us to like, man, why don't homeless people go to Costco and get samples?
Well, it was my terrible idea of if we buy homeless people Costco memberships, then they could just eat samples.
Eat samples.
Because, I mean, the government, typically city governments, per person who are experiencing homelessness, the amount of money that they pay is astronomical for the most part.
I'll link an article in the description called $1 Million Murray. It's a guy in Las Vegas.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry. It may actually be Reno, Nevada.
The baby Las Vegas.
Yeah. He's a well-known gentleman who lived on the street. His name was Murray. Mm-hmm. And just the amount of times that like EMTs were called to take care of an issue, or he had to have his stomach pumped because he had issues with alcohol. And
it's a documentary?
No, it's an article. It's like a 10 or 12-page article. I think it was originally published in the New Yorker. But somebody sat and like added up like what this guy's hospital is, like well over $1 million worth of stuff. Which, so you asked, I forgot to press record, so we're kind of going back and well, we only lost like 5 minutes of stuff. But we were talking about how, homelessness overall, at least nationwide, we could get into a long discussion about how they count homeless people and all that stuff. We won't. But homelessness overall has been on the subtle decline. But there's two stats within there that continue to rise, and that's people who are chronically homeless and people who are unsheltered and homeless. And we were talking about why do we think that is? Like, why is that an issue?
I think at one point, nobody knows, which is why we're still in this predicament. And I think that's the other thing is it's not an easy fix. If it was, people would have made those changes a long time ago.
And I would argue that you can't end homelessness.
It's continual.
I think there's a scriptural basis for that too.
Oh snap! What is that?
I think the poor will always be with us.
Well, definitely, I think in this, there will always be poor. I don't know. It's really tough. Part of me thinks it's part of it is a breakdown of the family unit. It's actually interesting. I think in the United States, I was talking to my wife about this. There was an era, I think it was our parents' generation, and probably when we were like little kids too, but it was era like you turn 18, you get kicked out of the house, like go on to be a person and, be an independent person, which is pretty interesting because other cultures, you take care of people, like your family stays as a unit long term. Like not like 18 you kicked out. And on a fascinating note, I was talking to a friend of mine who goes through our church from Kenya, and he immigrated to the United States, and now he's a caretaker
for like a DSP?
For older elderly.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, but I was talking to him about it, and he was like, yeah, for people, like a lot of people from Kenya do this as for work in the United States because it's not work for us. It's something that we just do naturally because in our culture, this is what he told me. In our culture in Kenya, you take care of your grandparents. Like you stay at home, you make sure they have everything they need. You care for their needs. Yeah. And so he says, like, I'm getting paid to do something that I would do anyways. Wow. And so there's a lot of people, he said, Kenyans who come here and they're caregivers because it's just what they know. They just do it naturally.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that's
so cool.
That is cool. But kind of like United States culture, there's a lot of cool things about United States. I'm not, saying that United States is bad by any means. But I do think it's interesting that kind of independent, like, we don't need anybody.
Yeah.
Like 18, you be successful, go out, and, and I think there's some positive things that could come from that, independence. But there's also the belief that if you don't do that, you're a complete failure. Like, like you stayed at home. And I get like the meme of, you're just living in your mom's basement playing World of Warcraft type of deal. And obviously that's not good.
That's not great.
But when you are a benefit to your family, as in when you're contributing, like I don't think it's healthy to have someone who's like, just mooching off their parents.
Totally.
But if they're contributing to the family, it's like, why do they have to move out? If you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well,
it's just an interesting thing about it.
And it's a weird, I feel like it creates that precedent of why like we don't care about our grandparents anymore, and they're like, oh, they're useless,
Yeah.
Which I think like we've started to equate their physical utility, of like, well, grandpa can't mow the lawn anymore, so he's useless. I gotta go mow his lawn, and like we equate that we equate that like inability to like do like physical tasks with like an like we equate that with like a mentally on like, oh, well, you don't have anything important to say.
Which is crazy because I feel like that's opposite of what Scripture says.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I think we need to value
Yeah.
those who have lived longer than us. And instead, I mean, you can even talk about like the retirement home type deal. It's like, oh, let's just,
Even like the wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, just sweep them and, just go live off your life, and
Yeah.
and I understand like the physical tasks and stuff, they have more challenge, but like, again, I just tie them back into the Kenyan culture. It's like, no, they take care. Yeah. And I think like Scripture kind of speaks to that too, like honor your father and mother. And I don't think it means you have to agree with everything they say. I think that sometimes that verse can be used in a poor way where it's like, well, I'm your dad, and even after you're a grown adult, it's like you have to listen to what your parents say no matter what. Yeah. But I think it's like an honor and respect type of a thing. And I do think in our culture, that's something that we don't value that I think is a biblical concept. And one of my spiritual mentors, he felt convicted, and his mom lives with him, and she's, I think she's in her early 90s now, and lost her husband in the last decade, and they're living together. He's taking care of. She has her own like mother-in-law sweet deal, but I'm like, man, I kind of, even though it's hard, it's also hard to be a parent and take care of your kids.
Yeah,
and then I think it's like how the life cycle happens.
Yeah,
but tie back to the homelessness though, I think the independence of the culture of the United States, like we're all independent bodies, like we don't need each other to succeed. That I think actually contributes to homelessness.
Totally.
Because there's the breakdown of we are not individuals, but we function as an organism.
Yeah.
Like we're a group of people, we're a community element, which I think actually Scripture, I can't just pull verses off the top of my head right now, but I think overall that's what Scripture teaches, like the church is a family. Like this is we do this together. It's not just like individuals thrown out.
I remember hearing Andy Crouch talk about I'm obviously not a theologian nor a Greek historian, but
Me neither.
The paterfamilia, I think it's called.
Sounds fancy.
It's it's this phrase that kind of encompasses how the Greek, like the Greco-Roman culture lived. And it's like you had, it'd be you and your wife and your kids, but also some kids that maybe you've adopted, and maybe your brother lives there and your parents live there, and maybe your wife. You have this huge family unit that all lived in the same space and coexisted. And when you understand that, please, if you want to know more about that, don't take what I just said. Go
do your own research.
Do your own research. But go, like, when you understand that more and then read the New Testament and how Paul is, like when you think about like when Paul goes into a place and he's like, well, I've never baptized any of you. Well, except for this person in this person's house. And then it's like a dozen people. You're like, you had a dozen people living with you? It helps, create some more context for, how stuff in the New Testament is written.
Yeah.
But it's funny when people ask me, because I'm fortunate enough to spend like a lot of time in the homeless communities, and I've gotten to know a lot of people that live on the streets, like at Wallace. And so when people ask me like, what do you think is what's the solution or what's the cause or whatever? I think what it really comes down to is, and I'm just speaking broadly, not saying just the church, but to overall, like as a country, as a culture, we like to legislate like change and be like, well, we'll just pass these laws and do these things and
but
change
not live it out ourselves.
City ordinance, and do these, change these city ordinances and do all this stuff. Well, I think we have reached the point where I think legislation can help things, to an extent, but I think we've reached the point, which is I think that's why we see chronic homelessness and unsheltered homelessness continuing to rise, is that we've reached the point where legislation can't do anything anymore. Like you can't
dump money on it to fix a problem.
Exactly. But just look at Scripture. Like you can't legislate heart change. That's the whole reason we need Jesus. And I think it's gotten to the point where to really make change, and that's why I think programs like the Union Gospel Mission and like Be Bold Street Ministries and organizations like that go in and get to know these people and know them by name and can talk to them and have a relationship with them. That is how we're going to make. That's how you make meaningful change in anyone's life.
Yeah.
Is you get to know them and you have a conversation with them and you do life with them.
Yeah.
Like in that continuing to show up that's how, I mean, that's a lot of what Brooke and I have learned, like with a lot of the trauma and stuff form that we do with foster care, is that like that just continuing to be there, continuing to show up. That's how you start to break those, those.
And we talked about this yesterday. So, because we're recording this on Monday, but I watched Les Mis for the first time, the non-musical version. Yeah. And this is a good segue into talking about the Good Samaritan as well. But I had no idea about that movie. Yeah. Except for that it was a musical, the Hugh Jackman version, which I did not watch.
I don't like that one. I watched about 5 minutes. I do love Les Mis. I have seen the musical in person. It's great.
But all my friends, my pastor friends, have been like, Steven, you have to watch Les Mis. You have to watch it. I was like, no, I do not like musicals. But then I found out there's a non-musical version that Liam Neeson acted in and Jeffrey Rush and stuff. I think it was from the late 90s. But man, the storyline is incredible.
So good.
It's so good.
It's a book, I believe.
Yeah, it's all based on a novel, like a famous novel.
Yeah.
But the part that blew my mind is that the main character, who's a thief, his life was changed, and he dedicates his life to God, basically, because a dude loved him.
Yeah.
And forgave him for stealing.
Yeah. What'd you say in the sermon yesterday? Like, the cops bring him back to the house. So this book is like 100 years old.
The cops bring him back to the house, and he had stolen the silverware. And back in that day, silverware was actually silver, so I'm assuming it's pretty valuable. And so he stole the silverware in the middle of the night. And then when the cops brought him back, and they said, "Oh, we found this guy," to the priest, because the priest took him in, or I think he was a priest. But so the cops bring Liam Neeson, who was the thief, back and says, "Look, this guy stole your silverware." And the priest just looks at him, and Liam Neeson also punched the dude in the face when he left. So he's got like a big like scar or kind of like a black eye type of a deal, the priest says. And Liam Neeson comes back and they have him in handcuffs, and the priest goes, "No, he didn't steal those. He actually forgot the candlesticks, which are also valuable." Yeah. And so he like gave him the candlesticks, and the cops were like, "Oh, he was telling the truth?" And he wasn't. But but the cops were like, "Oh man, what?" And they let the dude go. And then that act of love and kindness changed the character's life. And then he dedicates his life to God. And from then on does, pretty incredible things in helping people, and does soup kitchens and makes a lot of money and runs a factory and gives a bunch of people jobs. And then, I mean, the storyline behind it is pretty incredible, but it was pretty interesting how it ties in, I think, with the Good Samaritan. Granted, we don't see, like the life change thing, but again, my reflection on the Good Samaritan was, I don't think it's supposed to define who our neighbor is. It's more of defining what our responsibility, what our duty is as followers of Jesus. And the other part, the Good Samaritan, we can talk like through the Good Samaritan story if people aren't familiar with it. But the Good Samaritan, the guy who helps the Jewish guy who was beat up on the side of the road, he doesn't like bring him into his life and like adopt him, in that sense. Like, he just did what he could.
Exactly.
He gave him some money to help out. He bandaged him, he soothed his wounds, stuff, and got him to a place where he could get help. And he moved on his way. And again, it's important not to build a lot of theology on parables, but just that piece, because I think we get overwhelmed, like, oh, I can't do enough. I'm like, you don't have to do enough. You just have to do something. Yeah, that's it. You have to do something, and then that's our responsibility as followers of Jesus.
I remember
to love people.
A counselor that I had for a while. He would remind me, because I would, there's a time where I was spending a lot of time like back in the camps at Wallace and doing a lot of stuff, and it was really hard for me because my mind frame was like, we're not doing enough. We're not doing enough.
Yeah.
And I remember he would tell me the story several times of. He's told it to me several times. I honestly don't exactly remember how it goes, but. It was something about, there's like an old man on the coast, and the tide was going out, and there were all these, like fish and whatever stuck in this tide pool. And if, they stayed there, they were gonna die. And it's way too many for him to get all of them. And he's sitting there and he's throwing them out.
Yeah.
And throwing them back into the ocean, right? And this girl comes up to him, or a person, gender doesn't matter. Person comes up to him and says like, "Hey, you're not gonna, like, what are you doing it for? Like, you're not gonna be able to save all of them." And he picks one up and he looks at it and he throws it. He's like, "Mattered to that one."
It's so true, man.
And it's so true. Like, no, you're not going to be able to save every single homeless person, but like, and that guy wasn't traveling those roads as like a, like an EMT, just saving people. And,
not that we know of,
he
at
didn't
least.
have a nonprofit. Didn't have a nonprofit or something. But yeah, you can help just one person.
And it's not even, to me, it's just do what you can. Like, I think some people are like, oh, I can't change this person's life. I'm like, well, at the least of things, at least it's a safe situation. Like, could you not pray for them?
Yeah.
Like that's it. So like I'm a police chaplain, so I go a lot of ride-alongs, and a handful of times, like they've talked to homeless guys and stuff like that, and they're doing their jobs and stuff, and I've just been like, I can't really do much, but I can pray for you. And I've just offered like, hey, can I pray for you right now? And I don't know what it's gonna do, but I'm like, what is our responsibility? And if we want to lead, as Jesus is in a conversation with the Jewish religious leader that he is with the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus says, "Do this and you will live."
Yeah.
Like it's not something like
eternal life. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not legalism. It's not a works-based faith. It's living out your Christian responsibility.
Yeah.
Doing what you can. Again, that's what he could do. Like, what can you do? I don't know. Can you give someone a couple bucks? Sure. Can you pray for someone? Like, dude.
Yeah.
Instead of going to the other side of the road, and I think you're right, it is overwhelming. Like you go through Wallace Marine Park or Marion Square Park, and again, you have to do it in safe situations.
There is such thing as discernment.
Yeah, discernment.
Wisdom from above. Yeah, like I would recommend if you're in Salem, do not just go out to Wallace Marine Park by yourself.
No, bad idea. Very bad idea. Yeah, not safe because I mean, there's some danger in there. 100%.
I remember a pastor, good friend of ours. He and his wife were missionaries in China for a handful of years. And I remember and I think a lot of this comes down to, we keep talking about this, slowing down.
I think it's the challenge of our day.
Yeah.
Like, I think for the church, when I'm talking about the church, I'm talking about not just our community at Liberty Christian Church, but the church as a whole, in the United States at least, we have to learn to slow down.
Yeah.
Because I think part of the problem is, talking back in the Good Samaritan, the priest and the Levite, who was like a temple assistant, I think they were just busy.
Yeah.
And one of the commentaries, I'm like, they're not bad guys.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, I don't have time for that. He's probably dead. You just move on with your life.
Yeah. Man. And so this pastor, he and his wife were, they were in China, and he had felt like the Lord had placed on his heart, like, hey, whenever someone asks you for money, give it to them. Mm-hmm. And so he did. And people would be like, what are you doing? Like, they're just going to go buy drugs, or like, hey, they're actually not homeless or whatever. And he's like, dude, I don't know, but like, this is what God's calling me to do.
Yeah.
And I think creating space to hear that, because how often do we like drive by something and be like, but I got to go to the grocery store and then I got to come back. And then you're like, well, it's like, but you could have stopped, parked your car and got like, hey, you doing okay? You need some help? Or, just, and I think we underestimate, like, I think sometimes we feel like we have to do some crazy thing, like, oh, I got to go buy this guy a cheeseburger and like have a conversation with him and share the gospel with him. I think sometimes just rolling down your window and being, just like, hey man, how's it going? And just having like, how often, at least in my experience, you can share too, of like, how often, I think when I first started going out into the homeless community, I was like, these people don't want me to pray for them. Like, they don't care. Mm-hmm. But the number of people are like, hey, can I pray for you? They're like, oh, that'd be great. Like, I mean, it's a community back there. There's a lot. So there's, people die or overdose or have, issues that they're like, yeah, could you pray for so-and-so? Or like, oh yeah, the number of times where people are like, my daughter's in labor, or like just had a kid, or, this thing's going on, or where they're like, oh, like there's like, this person needs prayer, and they want prayer, and like
it's prayer. And it's also, I think it's just community.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with you 100%. You do what you can. That's what I'm saying. You make sure, again, it's a safe space, be careful if you ever go by yourself. And I would suggest don't do it, go with a team or go with people who know what they're doing, type of deal, like Matt Massera people and stuff like that.
The parable of the Good Samaritan, like this person's walking on the same road that this dude got attacked on.
Yeah. Like it's like he's like going through his normal day.
Yeah.
And my conviction, there was a period of my life where it's like, I'm just not going to give homeless people anything, because it's like, they're just going to buy drugs, or just like, I don't know. And it's my conviction. So now I at least attempt to carry a handful of dollars in my pocket.
Yeah.
And when I can, and it's not like a legalism thing. It's not like feel shame if you can't, but like, hey, more often than I try to at least have some dollars in my wallet. So then if someone asks for help, I can start a conversation, depending on how much time I have. If I'm like, I try to be slow and at least have opportunity to pray. And I will say the times that I have, I've been more blessed. Like I was walking downtown one time, and there's a guy was sleeping on the thing on the bench, and I had a couple dollars in my wallet, and he asked for money. So I was like, "Hey, man," and we had a conversation. I was like, "Oh, this dude, he's needing a little help, or something like that." So and I feel like that's just really important, because if we become cynical in our society, then I feel like that is the road to the end.
Yeah, totally.
And it's like, oh, there's no hope. Because when you become cynical, it's like they're always going to be like this. There's no hope. I'm like, no, that's not true.
Yeah,
like we can't force anybody to change. We can't force anybody to believe anything. We can't force anybody to get help.
Yeah.
But the question is, what can we do? You don't want to enable, and I feel like that's an argument. And there are those who only potentially use money to purchase fentanyl or stuff like that. But more often than not, in my experience, that's not the case.
Yeah.
In small, scenarios potentially.
Well, and one of the biggest things, I think two important things. One, I think like I don't carry cash on me, but one thing I will do is, especially like in the like downtown corridor, like downtown Salem, if someone's like, "Hey, do you have any money?" I like to be able to say like, "Hey, man, I only carry cards, but can I buy you a cup of coffee?" I mean, you can't take 3 steps in downtown Salem without being
8
within
coffee
the door
shops.
of a coffee shop. So going and just buying, someone like a $2 cup of black coffee, like that really makes their day. And then a big thing for me is just like, "Hey, what's your name?" So there's so many folks that live in the downtown corridor where now I know their name and they know my name, and I can be like, "Hey, Joe, how's your day going today? Can I get you a cup of coffee?"
It's a relationship.
Yeah. And I think it really, because there's so many, just imagine, like think back to like when you were in school, like if you were the kid that got, like picked on, like imagine being that person that got like picked last in dodgeball, like
I usually got picked close to the end, but yeah.
like imagine that being like every day, like you just sit there and people just walk by you, walk by you and don't say anything. I remember what my second thing was.
Well, you remember Peter in Scripture? What do you think about this? There's the guy, I believe he's sitting outside the temple. Peter walks by, I believe he's with John, and he looks over, and the dude's asking for money, and he says, the famous song, the children's song, "Silver and gold have I not," and he goes, "Silver and gold have none, but in the name of Jesus, get up and walk." Yeah. Granted, I mean, that's probably apostolic authority or something like that. Like we're not going out there, he's telling people that they can walk. Well, like, what do you think about that though? On level, it's like, because I think in some regards, like we feel like we have to give money for everything. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Yeah.
I think in that case, the discernment was they knew what this man needed. And in that situation, and God used that story for, generations now in Scripture.
Yeah.
That's why it's like, do whatever you can and do it with discernment.
Yeah.
What we don't want to do is fuel legalism and guilt and shame.
Yeah.
That's, I think, is a negative overall.
Totally.
It's do what you can. I think that is my pitch for taking care of people.
Yeah. And I think you need to think about what can you do. Like, because if your frame of mind is like, "Oh, I'm too busy, I can't do anything," well, you probably have the wrong frame of mind.
Yeah, because you usually do something.
Yeah.
Like if you're saying, "I'm too busy, I don't have time," or depending on the situation as well. Like if you're walking by somebody, like, "Oh, I could pray." Like, how long does that take? 20 seconds?
Yeah.
And so you're saying, and then there's situations like you're alone, you have kids, so that's why using discernment is highly valuable.
One thing it's showed me is how much space I actually have in my life to do things I didn't think I had time to do. When you're like, I got this person a coffee and I prayed with them and chatted with them, and like 15 minutes has gone by.
Yeah.
And it didn't destroy my day.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's not like I do that every single day.
Yeah.
I'm not downtown every single day, but it's not like I do that every single day. So I think we really underestimate. Like, I think a lot of times we have a false sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Like, I have to get to this next thing. Like I think there is space for you to bless someone.
And I mean, I think in the discernment thing, like if you're walking, like I've done this before, like you're walking downtown Salem, or like you're walking by Marion Square Parkade or something. There's like a string, and it's like you probably can't stop every single one, but maybe just pray and say, Lord, if there's an opportunity, if somebody needs prayer, like make it known to me, something like that, because I think depending on people's different situations, we don't want to fuel legalism of like you're a bad Christian if you don't, stuff like that. But I think the discernment piece and really seeking God, and I think you have to go slow to do those things. And also, if you really want a kick in the rear, look on your phone and see how often you're on your phone every day.
Dude,
and that'll get you. It's because some guys, it's like I've talked to, it's like, oh yeah, I'm on my phone 6 hours, and sometimes it's music, something like that.
Yeah, just like leaving your podcast open or something.
Yeah. But I mean, this is kind of go a different avenue, but I do think smartphones, man, is it a negative on society overall?
Man,
I don't know, man. I know there's some positive things about it, but I think it has most definitely isolated people.
I think, Brooke and I have, it's funny, the last handful of months, Brooke and I have come so close to buying light phones.
Dude, me too. I'm so tempted.
The only reason I just use my phone so much, this is maybe just me making excuses, but I use my phone so much for work, and there's so many like apps on there that I have to.
That's the exact excuse I give myself too.
Control camera stuff.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's like I can get security from the church. I can see the cameras on the security church, so it's like
totally. Yeah.
That's how they get you there.
But it's getting to the point where I'm like, I think I just want to try it to see like, but how much like. Because I'm like, we have a security system at our home and whatever, and I'm like, yeah, but I could just set it from the house and like leave it alone. I don't need to check it every 10 minutes.
Yeah,
or like Instagram and stuff like that, or just connecting with people. I'm like, I can do that all from my computer.
Yes,
and I'm so much less likely to do it from my computer that's probably. So we're on the fence,
dude. Isn't it crazy? I'm the same place. I go back and forth. I'm like, I'm gonna buy a dumb phone or something like that.
Yeah.
But isn't it crazy to think about back in the day when you would leave your house with no phone and no contact with anybody? Dude, now you do that and you feel like, oh my gosh, like what if I get in a car accident? When reality is like that was normal life for for centuries. You forget your smartphone, you're like, oh my gosh.
My dad in 2004 drove from Southern California to Vermont for a photo class.
Wow.
And I was just like, how do you
maps, no smartphone? Yeah, it's crazy to think about. And now it's like, part of it's probably bad for people's anxiety, but now you can like track. Like my wife knows where I am, like with the phone, and I know where my wife's at. So I'm like, oh, is she on her way home and stuff? And it's so convenient. But at the same time, man, I don't know, man, what it does to you mentally.
Yeah,
it's just
I think
crazy
it's too much information. I remember,
it's a lot.
I spoke on solitude at church like maybe a month or so ago. But around the same time, I released a YouTube video on solitude, and I did some fun data digging on stuff. And it was. I want to say between now and 2000 and it was like 2015 to like 98 or something. It's like we were consuming like 11 times more information
now than then.
Between 2000, it was like 1998 to 2015.
Oh yeah,
it was just like, and I remember hearing this from like a Bridgetown sermon. There was like, there's more information in like the New York Times now than the average person in 1900 consumed in their entire life.
That's insane.
And you're just like,
it's so.
What do you do with that?
But we wonder why people have anxiety and depression problems.
Yeah,
and there's so much negative. It's not just the negative parts. Just so much. There's a lot of terrible things. But like an example, 2 months ago, a month and a half. There was the wildfire in Hawaii, torched an entire city or an entire town, Lahaina. 1,000, I think there's more than 1,000 people missing, but a lot of people deceased through it. And it was terrible, and they'd like sent cadaver dogs and stuff, and it was like top news for like 2 days. Now, it's nowhere.
Yeah,
no one's talking about it, but they're still reeling from pain. But what I'm saying is, it's a lot of information, and it used to be that you focused on the trauma and the pain in your personal community. And this could potentially, we're just talking about ideas on here, and neither of us are professional in this realm, but this could potentially, I wonder, lead to a homelessness conversation.
Yeah.
Because there's so much in the world. We're like, I can't
to go there. Yeah.
I can't care about the problems in my own community.
Yeah.
There's so much.
Yeah.
And then we're worrying, and a lot of mental capacities going towards something that's thousands of miles away, and when the reality is you can't do anything.
Yeah.
Maybe you can give money to some organization that's over there.
But what's happening right here in your community?
Yeah, like what's happening like where you're at.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it, we talk about like we have access to just so much information and so much. I can't remember. I just rewatched The Social Dilemma not too long ago, and they were talking about the stats of how much faster fake news and bad news travels than true news or good news.
Well, that's the algorithm problem, right?
Yeah.
It's like if something terrible happens, like the algorithm picks it up, and because more people click it.
Yeah, and it's super. I think what I was going to say earlier is, one thing they talk about a lot with like trauma informed care or trauma informed parenting or any of that stuff is changing your framework. When like for us, like going through a lot of the training we've been through for foster kiddos, they talk about like changing your frame of mind. Like a lot of those kids have like adverse behavior and whatnot. And a big thing is changing your frame of mind from asking like, why are you doing this? Like what's wrong with you to like, what happened to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because so much of this stuff, there's some deep upstream issue of trauma or pain or something like that. And that's so much of our society is there's just so much, we have access to so much stuff from everywhere. I mean, I just think of like through COVID, where COVID was happening at the same time that there was, just so, like
the race riots and
like everything that was happening with Black Lives Matter and rioting, and then another wildfire season, and
doesn't that feel insane?
All of, and you're
that
just
was
like
3 years ago.
Holy moly! And then, but that's still that stuff still. Like we're just like the wildfires in Hawaii, and there's wildfires here, and when the Titan submarine thing happened, there was that submarine full, or that ship full of immigrants that sank in the Mediterranean. All of this stuff that you wouldn't have access to this stuff 20, 30 years ago that we're all dealing with. And then, just like stats on people who are like, for instance, like in foster care that end up living on the streets because they have, trauma that's not dealt with, or they age out of the foster system or something.
Yeah.
And then using substances as a method to cope with that. And then, it's just compounding issues.
Dude, it's tough. I think the biggest piece is in this day and age, you have to have some sort of boundaries. And I think that's what we suck at. At least I do.
Yeah.
It's like, because I'm like, I'll check the news, I'll check my email all times during the day. And it's like, maybe what's the healthiest is have like a window. So you don't want to be like an ostrich or put your head in the sand and be like, everything's fine.
Yep.
But I think you want to focus more on what's happening in your community. I think it's important to have awareness of what's happening in the world, but obviously only to an extent that you can handle.
Yeah.
Or else you're just going to be depressed all the time.
I think like it's the big thing, FOMO.
Fear of missing out.
Yeah. No, I think that's a big thing of like, and especially like, walking in a situation where you have no idea that, like, oh, I didn't know this was a thing, or like you just feel out of the loop or whatever. And I've felt more lately that me striving to be in the loop makes me feel worse than just feeling out of the loop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's wild.
It's the balance and the boundaries, I think.
Yeah.
Because then again, tying it back into our whole kind of, it seems like the whole theme for this entire podcast and kind of our faith movement right now is just learning to slow down and be with God. And I think if we do that, some things just fall into place. Yeah. Like the Good Samaritan story, we start not worrying, but we start caring for the needs that we can meet. I think that's the challenging part. And when I was reading commentary on the Good Samaritan, it said, what does it mean to be a good neighbor? It means to have compassion. Compassion leads to care, caring for needs that we can meet. And I think that's the hard part is the 99% of the needs that we see, we can't meet.
Yeah.
And it's like, tragedy, let's just send a bunch of money. Yeah. We've talked about like, sometimes that's nice, but does that, like homelessness, like, like legislation, let's just throw more money at it.
Yeah.
And maybe, as you said, there can be some changes made there that are helpful, but like we want to see people's lives restored.
Yeah.
We don't want it to enable. Like, what does that look like? And I think it's through relationship. And that's kind of goes back to the individualism of our country. It's like there is no relationship. It's very like isolated.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'm working. We're shooting tomorrow a volunteer video for the Union Gospel Mission.
Nice.
And a big reason they're doing it is because there's a big misconception about. I think a lot of people just think like, oh, Union Gospel Mission, like you go there and you volunteer and serve food. But there's so many different ways to get involved.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah, of course they have people that serve food. But see, tomorrow we're shooting, they have the donation center downtown. They have people that volunteer there to help sort things that come in. They have people that, there's a guy who he volunteers at the mission store. He comes in, I don't know what his background is, but he comes in and tests all the electronics. So all the electronics that go out onto the floor are functioning. There's people that do devotionals. There's a gal that does art therapy. Like our church went and helped do some yard maintenance there.
Totally.
You know, so it's
5 square yards of gravel. It was a lot.
It was a lot. Yeah. But I think people, I think a big thing people do is they underestimate how their gifts can be used for the kingdom.
Totally.
You know, and I think like, you know, I could be misspeaking here, but I don't think I am. I believe there's people that come in and volunteer to help with the bookkeeping at the UGM.
Sure.
So it's stuff like where it's like, you know, imagine you're an accountant and you're like, oh, my gifts, like, how am I going to use these for the kingdom? Like, well,
Yeah.
there's, you know, there are people that do need your assistance, you know, and what God has gifted you in.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of my passions for the church, not just our church, but I think when people actually utilize their spiritual gifts.
Yeah.
And I think the sad thing to me is there's so many, probably thousands of people, even in the city of Salem, that have gifts that God has given them that they're just sitting on their hands.
Yeah.
And part of it's sometimes it's not even their fault. It's just that they're not given opportunities to use their gift. So that's my passion, is finding people's giftings and just seeing God use them in their giftings.
And having someone that's discipling them.
Yeah.
And helping them grow.
It's not like throwing them out to the wolves, you know, it's
totally.
Yeah. Walking with him. So
yeah. Should we pivot? And
pivot to what? We're talking about aliens? Just kidding.
Oh no.
Yeah. Let's go for it.
Dude, I did see that. You know that alien that was in Mexico?
The one the fake one? I saw it was fake news.
Yeah, it was
like the body that they unveiled.
Yeah, it was like a llama skull.
On a 10-second kind of side note, I was talking to my wife about it. My wife is very smart, and she always has great intuition and stuff, because we were talking about aliens, and I was like, I don't know. You think there's aliens that exist, you know? And she was like, well, I don't know, but I think God created humans in his image. And if there is some organism that exists outside of the planet Earth, you know, I think that there's alien life as in like plants and potentially stuff on planets, because it's basically like infinite possibilities.
Yeah.
But as for like humans, she was like, I just don't see why God would do that. Like, I mean, I guess he could, but the whole like made in the image of God, that's something I've been thinking about.
Yeah.
But anyways, so we talked about Good Samaritan.
Dude,
you were taking notes like a madman yesterday, yeah?
And all this week.
Well, last weekend. And side note, if you haven't listened to it, you can listen to it online.
Totally.
That's what the podcast is for. So kind of dissecting the thoughts from the weekend before. So
yeah, this one, I just think, I guess, side note too, before we get into this, part of the reason we do this podcast and why it's called The Spiritual Gap and why we release it on Wednesday, is to help fill that gap between the Sundays.
Totally.
And help get people in the Word. And that's even true for me. This has really helped me spend more time in Scripture.
You slowed down and reflected.
I know.
Look at that.
It's been great. Dude, this is just a really cool passage of Scripture.
I think it's fantastic.
And I think there's a lot happening. There's a lot happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. Talk to me about it.
That I don't think a lot of people quite notice. I'm not a theologian.
Me neither.
But I've done some research. So maybe do some research as well. Okay, so we're in Luke 10 for the Good Samaritan, right?
Yes.
Okay. You know what's interesting is what happens right before the parable of the Good Samaritan?
I don't have my Bible in front of me, but it has something to do with Jesus sending out his 12 disciples.
Jesus sends out the 72.
Oh, 72, okay.
So start of Luke chapter 10, he sends out the 72.
So when he's having the conversation with this guy, is he by himself?
Well, hang on, we'll get there.
Okay, sorry.
We'll get there. Okay. So he sends out the 72, and that's where you get, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. Jesus has a big long speech, blesses them, sends them out. And that's 1 through 16.
Okay.
And they return in 17.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Where did he send them out?
Jerusalem? Bethsaida? I don't know.
He just
He just sends them out anywhere?
He just sends them out.
That's awesome.
Yeah. To the heart of the field. But if you're being sent out somewhere, how are you getting there?
Walking.
You're walking on the roads.
Yeah. Oh, I see where you're going with
Isn't
this.
that super interesting?
Yeah.
So they return.
And then Jesus potentially uses this dude as an example to the guys who were...
Yeah, Lord, even... So, they return. The 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in his name. He replies, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I've given you authority to trample the snakes and the scorpions, to overcome all the powers, all the stuff.
That's a pretty big thing to skip over. Satan falling down from lightning from heaven. That's pretty bizarre.
Yeah.
That's to think about.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
But I love, you get in here, he's like, hey, don't rejoice that you have these things. Rejoice that, your name is written in the book of life.
Nice.
I think that's cool.
That's awesome.
These things are cool, but like, rejoice that you get to spend eternity with me.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting. You get these people that go out in the road and they're traveling, and then they come back, and then you get the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
They like
maybe they were on the road to Jericho. Who knows?
This is the frame of mind that they're in.
Yeah.
Of like being on the road. So I think that's super interesting.
They were actively, and I think that's the cool thing about Jesus in his teaching his disciples. He gives people hands-on things that they can do. Like as he is developing them as followers of him, followers of Jesus.
Yeah.
And as he's training his disciples, the 12 and the 72 in that passage, he's not just saying something that they can apply to their lives that day.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool because they're living out something.
Yeah.
And Jesus is training them as they're living it out. And it's very different to like our collegiate school thinking of like, go through a classroom, take a class, it's like, no, they're doing it. And then Jesus is kind of molding them as it's happening.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So I think for me, this is where things got super,
okay.
Just super rich, I think. Okay. Right.
Yes.
So Luke 10:21, at that time, Jesus full of joy through the Holy Spirit, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned and revealed them to little children. Okay. And then so he says a bit more stuff. And then verse 23, then he turned to his disciples and said privately, blessed are the eyes that see what you see. For I tell you that many prophets and kings wanted to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Super interesting.
That is interesting.
Because the scripture to hear is like that's a phrase that's used a lot in the Old Testament.
To hear what you hear, but they did not hear it.
Yeah. Okay. So you ready? We're
going
to go a little deeper now.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So now we get to the parable of the Good Samaritan. I got to pull up my laptop now.
Yes, do it.
I took a lot of notes. This stuff is just so fun to me, and I think I love this stuff, and I think I know not everybody loves like the deep like diving into the weeds of this stuff, but for me it shows one thing, it shows just how much thought is put into, because obviously we don't know exactly how this, like all these conversations took place, but how the Spirit moved through Luke in writing this to create just so many intricate layers of depth to this. I think it's just so fascinating.
All right, hit me.
I just love it. Okay.
Now I'm excited.
So the parable of the Good Samaritan. And for those of you who might have your Bible out and following along, I am reading in the NIV. But
if you're driving, don't read your Bible right now.
Please don't. Okay. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus.
Okay.
And you pointed out yesterday, this is an expert in the law.
Religious law, yeah.
Yeah.
So like a Jewish lawyer. So like a theologian lawyer type.
Right.
Not like Roman law or Greek law, but Jewish Messianic law, yeah.
So if you're an expert in the law, for starters, you have the first 4 books of the Bible memorized.
Yeah.
Like just think, if you're driving, when you get home, if you're sitting at home, go grab your Bible and just hold the first 4 chapters of the Bible. They had that memorized.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
4 chapters, 4 books.
Sorry, 4 books.
Actually, I think it's 5.
Is it 5?
It's a whole Pentateuch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy.
That's crazy.
But I think mostly Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
or like the big law.
Yeah. So they had this it even if they don't have it like verbatim, like they know it.
It's insane.
They know everything that's there. Yes. Okay, right? So this is the guy who's testing Jesus, right? What is written? Okay, teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Mm-hmm. What is written in the law? Jesus replied.
I just love Jesus says that. But yeah.
How do you read it? Okay, this is super interesting. He answers, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind.
Yes.
And love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a few interesting things here.
So Deuteronomy 6.
Yep.
And was it Leviticus 19?
Leviticus 19.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So Deuteronomy 6 is interesting. So this is part of a daily prayer.
Yeah, I read this. They do it every single day.
The Shema Israel.
Yeah.
You know what Shema means?
What does it mean?
Hear, O God. So Deuteronomy 6, 4-9 is part of the Shema Israel. It's, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. And Lord here is all caps, Yahweh. Mm-hmm. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. What's missing?
The mind.
The mind. So, why would he add the mind? He knows this thing by heart. Like he says it every single day, and he adds mind.
The religious leader adds mind?
Yeah. Isn't that super interesting?
I wonder.
And what he's testing Jesus. He's trying to like overcome Jesus with his mind. And he like,
oh, that's fascinating.
Does he like, because it's not written in scripture as mind. Like this prayer that he says every day does not have mind in it, but he adds mind in it. I just think that's so fascinating.
That is fascinating. In the synoptics, I'm curious. We have to do more research on this because other translations, I mean, we have to read Deuteronomy 6 because Deuteronomy 6 does not have mind, does it?
Correct. That's what I'm reading right now.
Oh, that's Deuteronomy 6. Yeah, that's what we're reading? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I wonder if part of it's like the Greek translation or if it's like he's just adding his own. I mean, I don't know. That's fascinating.
It's super interesting though.
Yeah.
But then I think going back, like the fact that he quotes the Shema Israel and go back to what Jesus had just said to his disciples, many people, many experts have wanted to hear what you hear and have not.
He's talking about this guy. So here's something that's crazy. And we've talked about this before. There's a lot of power in the level of awareness that you have. We talked about this with the parable we talked about last week. The religious leaders who had Jesus right in front of them, they didn't have the awareness to see that he was talking about them and the prodigal son.
Yeah.
And I think it's similar to this one. Like Jesus is like, yo, I'm right here, man. And he's like, oh, I've got this in the bank. He doesn't have the awareness to see that he has the Son of God right in front of him. I just think that's fascinating. And so he's so confident.
Yeah.
And so prideful when he's missing that level of awareness.
Yeah. It's so, it's just,
he's trying to overpower Jesus, as you said.
Yeah.
Like I'm smarter than, and it says he's testing Jesus, right?
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. I just think it's so interesting.
Yeah.
That
he's adds a little tagline.
There's so much
tagline,
like, there's so much like strife and like tension in this conversation.
Yeah.
You know, because he responds like, it's like the obvious response of like, oh, Leviticus 19, Deuteronomy 6.
Yeah.
Like we say these every day.
Yeah.
You know, the Shema is real.
And that's why Jesus responds and says, yeah,
you're right.
Do this and you will live, right?
Yeah.
Not say it, not being legalistic. He said, like actually doing this.
Yeah.
And you'll live.
And here's Leviticus 19. So love your neighbor as yourself. If you go back to the beginning, so this is Leviticus 19, verse 18.
Okay.
It starts, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord.
Yeah. That's good stuff, man.
I love that. Like, don't bear a grudge.
That's good stuff.
Yeah.
But what a conversation Jesus has with this religious leader, dude. Or the lawyer, the religious messianic lawyer. Mosaic lawyer, the Mosaic law. And I love that Jesus, again, he makes him think. He says, what do you think? What's the law say? Like, you know, like you need me to tell you? Like, you got this. And then he responds and Jesus is like, yeah, that's it. Do this and you will live. And then what's he say next? I think he says something along the lines of, he wants to justify his actions. I thought about that a lot.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think he's justifying himself from? And I think it's because he's like, oh, here are the people that I want to love, like these Jewish people.
People that are easy to love.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because it's to justify his action, like, well, who is my neighbor? And I think he's assuming Jesus is going to say, well, the Jews.
Yeah.
But that's not what Jesus
Well, I mean, that's exactly what we do with, like we were just talking about with homeless people.
Yeah.
They're like, who is my neighbor?
Yeah.
You know, or like kids in the foster system, or we were talking about before we started recording, like human trafficking or people who are incarcerated.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much happening in our city, and this like, you know, we obviously have the awareness because we talk about it as in like, oh, these people are, well, like the phrase like, oh, they're a drain on society or they're a burden to society. Like you know that these people are a burden in your community. Like those are the words that you're using.
Yeah.
But are you choosing to treat them as your neighbor?
Yeah.
And be a part of their solution? Because if they're a burden in your society, then helping them helps everyone.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't know. Where do you think the line is, though, with the enabling conversation? Because that's one of the big arguments people have, like with helping people. It's like, well,
Yeah.
if we feed people every day, like teach a man to fish type of a deal. Where do you think that line is? Well, and I think part of me, like, again, at the Good Samaritan, like, well, what's our Christian responsibility?
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
you know, and at the end of the day, people will be accountable to God. And like, what are we supposed to do? But
Yeah.
what do you think that balance is, that line?
I have two answers.
Okay.
One, so the Salvation Army, their kind of their mantra is soup, soap, salvation.
That's awesome.
Get people fed, fill their bellies, get them clean, let them take a shower, hot shower,
Yeah.
get themselves clean. Then they're in a place to hear the gospel. You know, because I think it does a couple things. Like, if I'm hungry, don't talk to me. I want to eat food.
Yeah.
It's like, even for just normal people, like,
Yeah.
I get grumpy when I get hungry.
I think it's also a relationship thing.
Totally,
Like,
sitting down at the table, like,
Yeah.
like them taking the food from you, and like you know, smiling at them, and like them being able to get clean, and just, I think it adds like a sense of dignity too,
Yeah.
of like, helps put them on the same plane of like, because imagine like, I know, I'm not trying to offend or make a bad comparison here, but like I do a lot of like hiking and backpacking, and like we'll sometimes go like 7-10 days without showering, and so like you get on like a shuttle to go back to your car or something, and it's like, you know, there's a bunch of tourists who just got out of a hotel that morning, and you smell gross, and you're like, can I hang on to the roof? You know, like, you're like, I don't want to be around these people.
Go jump
like,
in the lake.
Yeah, like I smell terrible. I look gross. My clothes are dirty. Like,
yeah. That's why the UGM does such good work too, because they provide those things for people.
yeah, and so I think it's a thing of like, give people food, like allow them to be clean, and then they're in a place where they can hear the gospel. So I don't think that continuing to feed people, and because too, I think a big thing with the UGM is, you know, they're obviously the biggest, I guess, soup kitchen, as you would refer to them, in Marion County.
Yeah.
And so to be able to bring people into their doors 3 times a day on a continual basis, you know, I think that does a lot for them just continuing to be there and be consistent and bring people in. I think that's how change can start.
You know what's interesting? I was talking with someone who's been a police officer for a long time, and they said, you know, I think that we need to focus on community relationships. And they said, you know, the policing stuff just comes naturally, like what we think of policing, like, you know, the violence and all, like the arrests and all the stuff. They said that you don't really have to work at that. Like it just happens.
It happens. Yeah.
But the being involved in the community and the relationships, you have to make an effort, or else you just never will.
Yeah. Well, I think you said Salem PD showing up for our trunk or treat.
Yeah, they're coming, and that unit, the community action unit, they do stuff like they're helping out in the afternoon. They do a bunch of stuff in the community.
Yeah, that's super rad.
And I think the vision long term is that they, you know, they bike around in different neighborhoods, and if there's high crime in a neighborhood, they'll go and they'll spend time in that neighborhood, and they're like bike around and build relationships. I think that's the long term. I don't know, but
I think so too. Yeah,
it seems like it's more of a, I don't know, community, like a relationship deal, instead of like, here's the law, you broke the law, you're going to jail. You know.
Yeah.
it seems like it's more of a relational thing. And I think anything functions better. Granted, it's more challenging.
Yeah.
I think building relationships with people is hard because you see the world differently than, again, the same as Good Samaritan. This dude helped a Jewish guy on the road. They were enemies, culturally speaking. He bandaged him. Again, he did what he could.
Yeah.
And I think that's powerful.
Yeah.
And the relationship side of things. He spent time with him. It's a parable, but you would assume that they spent a couple, hours together, maybe a couple days, a day. And I think there's power in that.
Yeah.
I'm for anything that builds relationships, community-wise, church-wise. I think that's what leads to healthy church growth, but also that leads to, I think, healthy community growth.
Totally.
Instead of being like, oh, here's this group over here, here's this group over here, group here. It's more of like, no, we are an organism as a community.
We're a body.
We're a body. Yeah. And the same, like Paul says, the church works together as a body, different functions, different gifts. I mean, it's the same thing in the community.
Yeah.
Granted, not everybody follows Jesus and knows Jesus, but they still have gifts and they're still a part of this community that you're in.
Yeah. And I think too, I guess my second answer to the whole enabling thing is there are organizations they definitely exist in Salem, but they exist in a lot of communities. They would be designated as like low barrier shelters. And I think there, in my opinion, and I've spent a lot of time researching and talking to people and like trying to understand the situation. And I think a lot of instances, low barrier shelters can do a lot of harm because, I think to help get somebody off of substances, you have to build a relationship.
Yeah, 100%. I think we talked about this last episode, but my friend who's a therapist, sex addiction and drug rehab counselor, said the highest success rate to get out of addiction is if you replace the addiction with a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
That's where you find success. So instead of doing drugs, you have somebody who supports you and encourages you towards healthy things.
That's what brought the addiction in the first place, was filling some void.
Correct.
So I think what a lot of low barrier shelters like try and do is be like, well, and I think part of this is a vocabulary issue of like, well, they're called homeless people, so the problem is that they don't have a home. Like, well, no, that is a problem that they don't have a solid structure to live in, but that's not the root issue here. And so I think a lot of low barrier shelters try and just like get people in and don't necessarily require that they are clean and sober, but that causes so many problems down the road because maybe you get into a low barrier shelter and you get, say, a housing voucher. Well, if you get evicted on a state or city sponsored housing voucher, you cannot utilize that service for, I can't remember if it's 2 or 5 years.
Dang.
And a lot of folks that go into low barrier shelters don't get clean, get a housing voucher, get into an apartment, and then get evicted because they're running it as a trap house or continuing to use drugs.
Yeah.
Well, they get evicted. Now they can't utilize that service again.
So they're screwed, basically.
So they're now in a worse spot than they were before.
That's tough.
And you haven't met the basic need of like, well, this person needs better relationships.
Well, that's one of the hard things is you can't force anybody to do anything. Yeah. And I think part of the challenge is the addiction. Because I don't think people understand what an addiction is. Like you literally cannot stop.
Yeah.
And then if they do stop, they go through withdrawals. Like they get sick.
You can, if you're withdrawing from alcohol, you can die.
Oh, really?
It's so alcohol and benzodiazepines, the only two substances you can die from withdrawals. Your brain changes how it functions to such an extent that basically if you stop giving it that substance, you basically your neurons go insane.
Yeah, because it's like it's turned into like your body depends on it.
Yeah,
but
a lot of people before they go to like Bridgeway.
Yeah,
maybe I shouldn't have said Bridgeway, but a lot of people who go to like places to recover from alcohol.
Yeah,
they're told like don't stop drinking until you get here, because if you can't get here till 48 hours from now, if you just stopped right now, you will die.
Yeah, well, when I served on the coast, our church worked with different rehab clinics and addiction clinics where sometimes people would be court ordered to go there. And we did a lot because my mentor spends a lot of time in that area.
Yeah.
And I walked through the facilities a couple of times for like tours and seeing how they do stuff. And they have like they kind of look like hospital rooms.
Yeah.
Where they, people just have to detox.
Yeah.
And they're like violently sick for 2 days.
Yeah.
Like puking and just dehydrated, and like their body's kind of, reassessing itself. And that kind of it just makes the conversation more challenging, like what to do. Because you would, in theory, if communities invested more in trauma therapy, you would think it would go a long way. But sometimes drugs, like if someone's addicted to drugs for multiple years, sometimes it like degrades your mind. And then you start talking to like, not even just that, but then you talk about mental health and like schizophrenia and stuff like that on top of that.
Yeah.
And it becomes really challenging.
Especially now, yeah. I was talking to actually Matt Massera. We were talking, if you guys don't know Matt Massera or Be Bold Street Ministries, definitely look them up.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Matt has an unbelievable story of 27 years of addiction and being pulled out of that. I remember him and I having a conversation over a year ago now about marijuana and how like when he was dealing marijuana, it was very low, like THC content. And now that stuff is like, like he's like, we're talking like 10, 20, 30 times higher than when he was dealing, 20 years ago. And he's like, that stuff, like it is like, people just don't understand. Like it's, most people can smoke and be okay, but there are people that like your brain is compromised to the point where it's going to cause some issues.
I have heard, I don't know if this is scientific fact, so this is just, we're talking about ideas, but I've heard that if you have a family history of mental health, schizophrenia, bipolar, stuff like that, marijuana increases your odds drastically that it could happen to you.
Yeah.
And that you could follow in that same path. And I have heard, because like back in the 70s, like people like smoking weed and stuff like that, like it was like homegrown, whatever.
Super low. It's not like hybridized strains.
But now I think you can purchase like almost pure THC in like liquid form.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I
think there's strains that get into like the 80, like high 80%. Like that's going to mess you up. When people back then were dealing with like 2, 3, 4, 5% THC.
Yes.
And it comes to like you're trying to fill a void. And I think that's the thing with why I just love the UGM so much, is that they have like the point is like get here, get into community, be a part of this community and let Jesus fill the void and be a part of this group that can continue to help.
And the thing I love about UGM is they're professionals. Like they deal with this stuff all the time. And so like some people like me, I would consider myself maybe slightly above average in knowledge on this stuff, but barely maybe. But they do this every day. And so sometimes it's like placing faith that this organization's going to do what they do. Yeah. And there's like Church of the Park and some other ones and stuff like that. And Salvation Army and Be Bold Street Ministries, like these guys do it. And so maybe what we're saying is if you feel called or convicted, reach out to maybe one of those organizations and start there.
Yeah. There's so many ways to volunteer at
because
UGM.
I think what we said before is like, we're not expecting, I don't expect people to go out by themselves. Like that's dangerous. Let's not do that.
Don't do that. I'll link a video in the description below of some outreach at Wallace Marine Park, just so people can get a view of like what it really looks like out there.
Because I think anything, again, that comes to relationship, I think that's a net positive.
Yeah.
But it is just a really challenging conversation, with the mental health and with the addiction and stuff. Like how do you get people off these drugs?
Yeah.
And now I think with fentanyl, hanging out with the police a lot, it's becoming so cheap that it's very easy. Like you're getting pills you can get high on for like $1.
Yeah.
And it's just, and it can be laced with other things that can kill someone.
Totally.
So overdoses going up and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and
overdoses going up. Even now, like we carry Narcan whenever we go out.
But you guys do? Mm-hmm. And now you can buy it from Walgreens.
Yeah.
You buy Narcan at Walgreens like $50 for two. deals of it.
You can get it for free too. If you go down to like Arches, there's places that'll just give it out for free. But people are like, they're getting such high doses of fentanyl that you're having to use Narcan like 2 to 3 times.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
Like I experienced one time I was on a ride along and a dude was having an overdose in a McDonald's bathroom. Cop goes in, saved the dude's life. He like rubs his chest and it goes like that, and the dude like snapped out of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just sad, and because the addiction thing is like literally they can't stop.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's like sometimes the housing thing. It's like, well, if you house someone, if they can't stop using,
They're just going to use in the house.
they're going to use in the house. And then, as you said, then they get kicked out of the house, and then they can't get housing.
Yeah.
And so I think the addiction thing is like, well, how do we solve that problem?
Yeah. It's so crazy. I mean, that's why Brooke and I started our little nonprofit. It's because there's so much, there's a lot of information like we're talking about of just knowing like, oh, I had no idea that, they get kicked out and then they can't reuse the services for 2 years. But really what I think it comes down to is knowing people's story and knowing their name. Because the thing I found with how much I've gotten to know people out in the homeless communities is there's so much you can relate to that it would just blow you away. Like how much you have a conversation with someone and you totally forget that this person lives on the streets, because there's so much that, a lot, like for starters, a lot of them have phones.
Everyone has, you can for free.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them like sports, I'm not a sports person, but a lot of them are like, last like, hey, do you know the score of the Beavers game?
Yeah.
And you're just like, like those little moments of humanity, or you're passing out donuts or something, and someone's like, "Oh my goodness, I love glazed old fashions." And I'm like, "I love glazed old fashions."
Yeah.
It's stuff like that where you're like, it reminds you like, "Oh, that's right, we are all created in the image of God."
Yeah,
all of us. Not just the ones that get to live in houses or the ones that don't have addictions, 100%. Or the ones that have it figured out.
Yeah.
I had air quotes if you're just listening.
Yeah. I don't think anyone's figured it out.
No.
Yeah. And I think that's, going back to the Good Samaritan, it's like, well, this dude who Jesus was talking to, the religious lawyer, he was missing something. And I think he was missing that, like actively living out his godly duty. And he's supposed to lead by example, we think, right?
Yeah.
And I think for us as Christians, if you think about that, Salem's not a super big city. You're like 170,000. Actually, I think we just got passed up by Eugene again. We go back and forth. Eugene just passed us. I'm like, dang it, Eugene. So we're number 3 in the state of Oregon. But you think about all of the thousands of followers of Jesus that live in this community. Because you think about doing all this work yourself, and you're like, this is impossible. Yeah. As you said, like you can go back to the fish illustration, But if the thousands of followers of Jesus in the community start actively living out their faith, then it's like, dude, that, and I think it starts with a couple people that are like, hey, and it becomes a movement. Yeah. And that's why it's like, just do what you can. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah.
Even if you just silently pray as you walk by or as you're driving, like that, if that's all you can do, that's it. That's totally fine. But
what's that stat? I don't know if it's accurate. I feel like it keeps going around of like if every church in America like adopted a kid, there wouldn't be any more orphans.
Every church?
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. That's why you're doing the Lord's work with foster kids and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I think if you think about, I remember looking it up once. There's some ridiculous number, like 55,000 registered churches in the United States.
I bet you it's gone down, but that's because if you think about it, I mean, we've talked about this before, but I think the average size of a church is less than 100.
Yeah.
And there's very few that are in the thousands.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you just drive, even in our city in Salem, and Oregon is a very, anti-church area compared to the rest of the country.
I think Oregon, Washington are the 2 most unchurched states in the country.
And still, I think it's around 50% of people that claim to at least believe in God or something. But it's going down. But yeah, California, the West Coast, and probably northeast coast.
West Coast, West Coast.
Yeah, that's right. But if you think about it, just in our community in Salem, you drive downtown around, like there's churches everywhere.
Yeah.
And some of them are like, when I go on police ride-alongs, different community neighborhoods that I typically don't drive in. And I'm like, oh, there's a church here? Oh, there's a church here?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a church here? They're like, they're everywhere.
Yeah. And you're like, what would happen? I remember who I was having this conversation with, but What would happen? And there are churches that do this. I'm not saying nobody does this, especially in Salem. I think First Baptist downtown does this. And we're getting into the winter months. They open up their doors and do like warming shelters. You know, like
the Presbyterian downtown does it. I think South Salem Friends Church does it.
Yeah, like think just like a few. Most of our churches sit empty Monday through Saturday
for the most part.
You know, like how can we be using that to serve the kingdom? You know?
And we've talked about this before. It's like the balance of building use and like, you know.
Yep.
We don't want to go in that conversation again. Listen to one of the last episodes.
Yeah. Exactly.
Was it the one before this? Two ago?
Maybe two ago. I don't remember.
Yeah. So I think it's just trying to be responsible. Again, the question I've asked myself is like, what's my responsibility as a follower of Jesus? Not as a pastor, just as a
follower of Jesus.
As a follower of Jesus. Like, what am I supposed to do? How are we supposed to live our lives?
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest challenge in the United States that we've talked about many times is that Christians do not act what they say.
Yeah.
Like we preach a sermon on the Good Samaritan. We're like, yeah. And then how does that change the way that you live your life?
Yeah. Well, and that's
maybe for some people it changes, but I don't know.
And that's exactly the story of the Good Samaritan, of this expert in the law.
He's not doing anything to our knowledge.
He prays this prayer every day of, you know, love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Correct. That's the right answer.
Yeah, that's it. You got it.
You know,
do this.
You know the thing. You know, you've gone to church enough. You sat in the pews long enough. Like you know all the things. You have them memorized.
Yeah,
and that's great. That's a wonderful thing. We're not saying that's bad at all. But now you have to go do it.
Yeah,
you know,
that's the balance. And we talked about Pete Caesar last episode, I think. But the idea of the balance of being with God and doing for God.
Yeah,
it needs to be balanced.
Yeah.
You can't just do all the time. You get burnt out, whatever. And you don't just want to like go and lock yourself in a closet or, go in the woods and not be a part of society.
Totally.
It's got to be that, and just pray all the time. Unless God calls you to do that. Again, we're talking about discernment, but I think it needs to be that balance. And if we're balanced in it, I think the doing for God comes out of a place of rest and our own relationship with God.
Yeah.
And we're more like, this is what God wants me to do. The discernment piece, the prayer,
Yeah. So as we've said for 4 episodes.
Yeah.
Slow down.
Yeah. If you haven't picked that up.
Yeah.
And, the more you talk about it, I think the better, the better it will be at it. I don't think that's the word I'm looking for. But if we talk about it more, we're more prone to start applying it to our lives. Okay, I think there's some stat like if you want to make a change to your life, if you like hear something like I want to do that, if you don't make a change within 48 hours, you won't make the change in the future.
Oh, crazy!
Something like that. And so like for me, like coming into the fall, I could tell that I was going too fast. Like let's go, and that's to me my personality. And so last week, early in the week, I was like, I need to slow down. And so, like with my sermons and stuff, I went on some walks. I prayed. I tried to slow down when I was walking into places. I'd pray in the parking lot, and I felt 10 times better than the week before. Because the week before I was just like,
That's crazy.
Yeah, and then I was like, no, I need to slow down, and I did, and I felt better. Look at that.
That's funny. Speaking of screen time,
yeah. Did you just get notified?
No.
Oh, that's good.
I told Brooke, I was like, I want to cut my screen time in half.
In half?
This next week.
Like phone screen time or like computer screen time?
Phone screen time.
Okay.
I'm kind of forced to have heavy computer screen time. But I feel this is embarrassing because I feel like this shows you how much screen time I had to begin with.
Yeah. What does it say?
I cut it down 85%.
Bryce is repenting right now. What's it say?
I don't remember. I'm not looking at. I was looking to see if we had any comments from last week. But no, I cut it down 85% last week.
Nice.
Yeah. I was like, well, I'm ashamed that I had that much cutting that I could do. But yeah, I feel like slowing down to realize that it took a lot of time. So yeah.
Mine was down last week because I went on a men's retreat with no service. There was no cell phone service, but it was down 50%. I think it was like an hour and a half a day on my phone. Like on my laptop a lot too.
Yeah.
But it's like, man, it's
crazy.
It is crazy.
Yeah.
And so just the ability to slow down and stuff. And like we went on our men's retreat and have you been to the Christian Renewal Center? It's out by Silver Creek Falls.
No,
it's amazing.
Yeah, wow.
It's incredible. It's like I was talking to the executive director. His dad built the place, and it was founded in the Jesus movement, and back in the 70s.
Okay.
And they just wanted people to go out and connect with God. So there's just basically log cabins, and one of them was like a lodge, I guess, and it sleeps like 28 people. And then they provide food for you, and you just there's no cell phone service.
Wow.
It's just, you're in the middle of the woods.
Sick.
It's silent.
That's cool.
It's amazing. And it's just the ability to have no cell phone service isn't a wonderful thing, because it's an addiction. I think we're addicted to our cell phones.
Oh, totally.
100%. And so if you take away the temptation, you're like, oh, I literally can't check my email. I can't receive anything. I have no Wi-Fi, no cell phone service.
I remember somebody explaining it to me kind of like a lake. You go out camping and you look at a lake, and it's, you got, the wind's blowing, and you got ripples and stuff on the surface, and it takes the whole night. You wake up the next morning and it's glass. Yeah, it takes time for you to detox from that, to get back to that place of stillness.
Yes. And actually, I've experienced this before. When I have gone on when I was a youth pastor and went on youth trips, I would turn my phone off or not have it with me or have no service. And if you're not on your phone for 5 or 6 days, you come back and you're like, oh, I literally did not touch my phone for a week.
Yeah.
This is great. And then you get on your phone again, and within 24 hours,
it's back.
It's back.
Yeah.
It's hard because you have to be really disciplined to have that balance.
Yeah.
Or else you just, and with TikTok and Insta Reels and all that stuff, it's they literally...
It's designed to addict you.
It's designed to addict you 100%.
Go watch The Social Dilemma. This podcast is sponsored by Lightphone.
Yeah. They have scientists and psychologists that, taught them how to captivate people.
Yeah.
And it's hard to put it down. And I was talking with a friend of mine who's really into this type of stuff, and it might be in the Social Dilemma documentary, which I've never seen actually.
It's super
I don't
good.
have Netflix anymore. But he said that these companies, Google and Facebook and TikTok and these things, their biggest competitor is sleep. Isn't that crazy? They're well, our biggest competitor is sleep. So it's either people on their phones or they're sleeping. So but I was that's mind blowing.
I remember one of the guys, in the documentary, he's a venture capitalist. And he was like, do you check your phone before you go to the bathroom in the morning, or while you're going to the bathroom in the morning? Because those are the only two options.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Dude, it's crazy, man. And this is another rabbit trail that we don't have to go down today, but on an economical level, I'm this is concerning for me long term, because so much money is based on advertising.
Yeah.
And just seeing things. And so the US is in tons of debt. I think people are in tons of debt. I think we're reaching $1 trillion in credit card debt nationwide.
Wow. We're over $1 trillion in student loans.
Oh, yeah, I think it's over $1 trillion student loans. I think it's 1.6 trillion.
What happened to the years of Jubilee? Those are so cool.
Yeah, I don't know,
Why'd
man.
we get rid of that?
But credit card debt, $1 trillion. So it's most of our economy is run on advertisements and just purchasing things. And so once that runs out,
yeah,
who knows, man?
Yeah,
people come to church.
Yeah, maybe we just need to have a Jubilee.
It's Jubilee.
Just
wipe it clean.
Wipe it all out. Thing.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a good one.
It's been a great one,
dude. Looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, dude.
This has been fun. Thanks for everyone who's been commenting and responding.
We have to do our shout out to Stevie. Stevie, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening, Stevie. No, it's been great. We've been doing it a month. Takes 30 days to make a habit.
Look at that. It's a habit.
4.
Yeah, I'm excited. So it's our 4th episode, and I like that it's just on the YouTube channel, and we can go back and listen, and hopefully these conversations age fairly well, but we'll see.
Hopefully
that will be to be determined.
To be determined. We'll see. I think it'll be good.
Yeah.
Nice.
Agreed.
Well, until next week. Enjoy the rain.
See you guys.